Hi everybody, Darian here with Pike Outside again. Welcome to part 2 of my series on best camping knots. Last time I talked about tensioning knots, both the sheepshank knot and the taut line hitch knot. Two very good knots to know, especially that taut line hitch knot. Today I'd like to talk about lashings. Lashings are such useful knots, kind of in a category all by themselves. And they're great for pioneering work, or at least what we used to call pioneering in the Boy Scouts. And that's something that anymore people seem to call bushcraft. But bushcraft is a bigger category involving a bunch of different skills. And pioneering is a very specific skill, and it's just used to build structures, shelters and tables and seats and things like that with rope and with pieces of wood. So we're going to start out by learning how to tie a hitch to start the lash off with. Then we'll do the lashing and stop on another hitch. So there's several steps in the process. I'm also going to show you two different types of lashings. There's multiple types, but there's two basic types that I really like. One is called a square lashing, and the other one is called a tripod lashing, which is basically just a variation on a round lashing. So let's get to it, and I will show you these awesome, useful knots. Alright, to start out, we're going to do a square lashing. So what you're going to need is your two pieces of wood that you want to join crossways. I'm going to take these two here, and I want to join them like this. The purpose of a lashing is to hold these two pieces together perpendicularly like this, in a manner such that they don't slide any direction. They're very firm with just a little bit of wiggle room this way. And that helps you build structures. It gives support to structures and helps you just hold things together. So let's give that a shot here. So to start out with, you're going to want to select a piece of cordage that's appropriate for the lashing. I really like paracord for this, but any type of rope will work. You just don't want it to be too fine. It'll just be harder to work with. But too thick isn't great either. I like a nice medium gauge like a paracord. Start out with a length that's appropriate for your lashing. I've got what I think is about a 7-foot length right here. What's appropriate is probably going to depend on how big of a piece of wood or pieces of wood you're trying to lash together. But in this case, 7 foot seems to work. And the only reason you don't want to go too long is just because it gets really unwieldy to work with, because you're doing a lot of looping around. So to start out with, we're going to do a clove hitch. A clove hitch is a joining knot that kind of tightens down as it's pulled on, so it doesn't tend to spin. That's why it's useful for lashings. So what we're going to do, I actually think I'm going to start with this piece here. What we're going to do is we're going to create kind of a little X across where we're going to start the lashing. This is the clove hitch. So once over like that, underneath and over, and there's that X I was talking about. See that there? And then you come underneath on this side, like so. So that's how it looks when it's all finished. So here's a different perspective on the clove hitch. This might help you all in YouTube land see how this is tied a little bit better. So I come over the top like that, underneath, over the top again. There's that X I was talking about. And when you come back, you go under this side right here. Tie it down real good. That's what it looks like. Then it doesn't slip or turn. Alright, so now I'm going to put the two pieces of wood against each other like that, form an X. Got our clove hitch there. Now we're going to do something called the wrappings. This is the first part of the actual lashing. So that's one time around. I like to do this 3 times at least if I have enough rope. And I'm just keeping everything nice and tight as I go. All right, that's 3 times around. You see that? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's what it looks like on the back side. Okay. Those are the wrappings. Okay. This next part we're going to do is called the frappings. F-R-A-P-P-I-N-G, I believe. Frappings. At least that's what I was taught back in the Scouts. So I'm going to start by going underneath here, like that. And then what I want to do is go around. I'm going to go around this portion here, such as to pull these lines, which are relatively tight, even tighter. It's going to pull them together and just tighten everything up. So again, this is something I like to do about 3 times. Every time you go around it, you really yank on it, it pulls everything even tighter. That's why it's better to do 3 times than it is to do 2 times, or 2 times than it is to do 1 time. There's a limit to how many times they're going to help you though. I think 3 is about as tight as you're going to get. Okay. So that is what it looks like. You can see the wrappings going around here, out there, the frappings right in there. Now let's tie it off with another clove hitch. Alright, so I don't really think it matters where you tie the final clove hitch. I'm sure that someone out there has a strong opinion on this, but I like to do it on the same one that I started on. And it doesn't really matter which side. I'm actually going to do it on the same side here. So you see it right there. And again, you make that X. That critical X. Okay. See how I have the X. And then I'm just going to come underneath. I'm just dressing the knot there, trying to get it to look good, trying to get it tight. Okay, that's it. That is the square lashing. The way that you'd use this is to join obviously perpendicular poles like this. Say you had a wall and for a shelter and you wanted to put a cross beam across the top. You'd use a square lashing. Or if you wanted to add some rigidity to some poles that you had up but you didn't want it to flex in the wind, give some more strength to it, you could put this in like that, lash it again. Let's pretend these trees are poles, and then that would just give you some strength and some rigidity to the structure. All right, friends, the next thing I'm going to show you is a tripod lashing. A tripod lashing is basically a variation on a round lashing, but instead of using 2 pieces and lashing them this way, you use 3 pieces and you lash them end to end like that, and it'll give you a tripod when you're all said and done. In contrast to a round lashing or a square lashing, you don't want it quite as tight. And the reason is you're going to tie it like this, and then you're going to want the pieces to kind of flex out. So you want just a little bit of looseness in there so that you can actually spread out that tripod. We're going to start the same way though. We're going to start with the clove hitch, then we'll get to our wrappings and frappings. I'll show you those, and I'm also going to end with the clove hitch. I see a lot of people end this lashing in particular with a timber hitch. I don't like those knots as well. I'm not as good at tying them, so I stick with those clove hitches and they work just fine. The tripod lashing is used to make a tripod, something that you could hang a pot over a fire with, something that you could use for making a bush chair. You've seen people make bush chairs out there. They start with a tripod. It's also something you could do to make a wash basin. I've seen people literally set up a tripod, put some sort of like garbage can liner up on top on the little points of the tripod, and then you could fill that with water and use that as kind of a wash basin or a sink or something like that. There's different uses for it. If you don't have trees, you can use those tripods as like the posts for a shelter. Or basically, say you've got a bunch of dead wood, it's a blowdown, or you don't have big tall trees in the right place, or you've got one tree that you like but nothing in the right distance. You set up a tripod and that acts as that other point. It's very stable. You can even stake the ends into the ground if you want, and then put stakes in, tie the ends to those stakes, and then you got something even more stable. And then you'd put a bar across the top. So it's super useful tripods. So that's why I wanted to show you guys that. All right, so start on one end with your clove hitch. I'm going to start with this piece here. Same exact knot that I showed you to start the square lashing. Clove hitch. All right, I'm going to dress it up like that. And then what you're going to do is you're going to start some wrappings. And you go across all of them. And again, you don't have to be as tight as you would with that square lashing that I just showed you. All right, that's enough times around there. You don't want to go too many times, otherwise the tripod legs will get kind of stiff. They won't want to bend. All right, so what we're going to do now is just move to the frappings, which I'm going to come around and then in between like that. See that? I'm going to do that probably just maybe once or twice in each section here. Okay, so now I've gone, 2.5, 3 times around. I'm going to come up on this side and do the same thing over here. Okay, that's how that looks. Let's go ahead and tie the clove hitch off here. Again, I'm going to tie it off right next to where I started, just on the other end. Same piece of wood. And then you just come under this side here. All right, so that's how that looks. And then you can kind of tell there's just a little bit of flexibility in there, like so. All right, so here's your tripod, okay? You just spread those guys out. And if you didn't give it enough slack in that knot, it won't want to spread out, but that's kind of a trial and error sort of thing to learn. And then if you have a little tail here, you can use it. If you're using this as like a cook stand, you could tie it to a stick with a hook on it, hook that piece of wood to the bail on your pot, and then you can cook your pot right over fire like that. Obviously this is a mini tripod just for demonstration purposes, but if you had a really small fire, maybe it'd work for you. I don't know. All right, friends, this has been Darian with Pike Outside. Thanks once again for joining me. Try out these lashings. They're going to help you out with some cool bushcraft camping projects that you do in the near future. Put them to use. You'll just see how useful they could be. If you have questions about any of these lashings, feel free to reach out in the comments. I'd love that. As always, be kind, be adventurous, and be cordial. Cordial? Cordial? Yep. Pike out. You know, it's kind of hard with these videos to pick like what is the best knots, and I've been trying to do for this best camping knot series what I use the most and the sorts of knots that accomplish tasks that you can't accomplish any other way. You know, something like a lashing, if you don't have nails, if you don't have glue or some other like hardware style affixation technique, that's what you got. And they're so good. Like a really good, well tied lashing is going to be way stronger than just one wrap of a cord. It's not going to slip, it's not going to twist. It's just, it makes your structure really safe, really secure. So that's why I included lashings in this series. You know, last week I talked about tensioning knots, and those knots are kind of unique knots, and they're so useful, especially that taut line hitch. I'm going to do another video on knots here coming up. I'm not sure what I'm going to include in it, but I'm trying to just include like the best stuff. Like if you had to learn only 6 knots in your life, which 6 knots should you learn? Something like that. And so far I've showed you the sheep shank, which isn't absolutely necessary, but it's an awesome knot. The taut line hitch, and then these lashings. So I got to think of a couple more. I think what we need to talk about next is probably some knots for joining pieces of rope together, and but there's some other ones too. I mean, there's just so many, like the bowline. The bowline's a classic one that everyone ought to know, and a good woodsman knot. So maybe we'll hit that one too. But we'll see. Stay tuned for more, guys.